I'm Professor Gerges-Yammine. I'm an assistant professor on the ESCP campus here in Paris, primarily in entrepreneurship, in design thinking, and in corporate entrepreneurship. And I do research on various topics, including entrepreneurial networking, investment decision-making, and more recently on female entrepreneurship. I also work quite extensively with entrepreneurs. I coach entrepreneurs in tech in multiple cities, in London, a little bit in the Silicon Valley, and here, of course, in Paris.
Can you tell us what the Women Entrepreneurship Day means to you?
I think women entrepreneurs deserve a day that is dedicated to them. Very few people maybe know about this day, but I think it's definitely needed. But we need to kind of go beyond the names and the kind of cliche, because in many cases, we try to celebrate women, but we don't really support them in the ways that we need to support them. So I think we need to kind of step beyond just dedicating a day for women entrepreneurs and really knowing how to support them.
The SISTA study shows a widening gap in venture capital funding for women-led startups, despite strong evidence that they generate higher revenue per dollar invested. So how do you explain this problem?
Yeah, so it's unfortunately a big problem, and maybe just to give you a little bit of background in terms of how this study all started. I was actually doing an ethnography at an investment fund. At the beginning, I wanted to kind of understand decision-making from the perspective of investors in general, and then I started to realize that what is happening within those investment funds is that a lot of women investors do not feel empowered because they're underrepresented. And within those dynamics, I also realized that there's a lot of situations where women investors feel that, they have to kind of go with the flow in terms of decision making. And eventually what happens is that there is less investment in female-led startups. So that kind of drove my interest in this topic in general. So going back to your SISTA study that I mentioned in my paper, so I think we always look at the side of the startups. So we kind of sometimes blame women for maybe being less confident, or we say that women entrepreneurs, they have childcare, for instance, so that kind of hinders them from eventually being able to raise funding. So it's kind of blaming the startup side, the women entrepreneur side. But what I saw is that there's also the investment side. So we need to look at women investors as well, looking at the side of women investors, because some of those dynamics are not conducive of investment.
From your extensive interviews with women entrepreneurs across Europe, what are the most striking challenges you've observed in their fundraising journeys?
So there are quite a few challenges that women entrepreneurs face. One of them is the unconscious biases. So we don't have many role models who are female entrepreneurs. We see a lot of role models who are men entrepreneurs who have succeeded, but that kind of it's very difficult to imagine a woman entrepreneur. I mean, especially here in Paris, it's most of the time men entrepreneurs who make it to the top, and we always kind of associate success with men entrepreneurs. So that's difficult to kind of encourage young females who want to become entrepreneurs, because they don't know who to look up to, but also for investors, because they're used to men entrepreneurs, and they kind of unconsciously sometimes assume that if you're a woman entrepreneur, you're maybe less likely to make it. I mean, there has been even studies on that show that the types of questions that investors will ask to men are different than the types of questions that they ask to women. So for instance, the questions that are asked to women are there is an underlying assumption that you are going to fail eventually, whereas for men, there's an assumption that you're going to win, and it's more around how you are going to win. So all of this kind of, in many cases, is unconscious. Another important reason is also networks, because there is still, and that's in many ecosystems that I've worked with entrepreneurs in, such as even London, Silicon Valley, Paris. There's this kind of old boys club where a lot of men entrepreneurs are meeting together, and they kind of feel also very comfortable, being with each other. And we know that networks are extremely important for success. So you need to have a network if you want to eventually succeed as an entrepreneur. So many women find it difficult to access those networks. And it's not only because of childcare, etc., because sometimes we assume, because of childcare, women are not able to attend these networking events and networking opportunities, but it's sometimes also because it's difficult to get access to those types of networks, so they don't feel as welcome. What we see is that it's a very male-dominated industry, so there's not enough representation of women investors. There's usually, let's say, 70 to 80% male investors, and then the rest are women. So naturally, it's in an environment where it's dominated by males. So whether, it could also be the same if you think of any type of career path that is dominated by women, you would also maybe see similar dynamics. So I would say the first step would be to encourage more women to become investors, so to kind of have a better representation. But even within investment funds where you have a good representation, so one of the investment funds where I did an ethnography, it was about 50-50. And even in those types of environments, many women investors did not feel legitimate. They felt that they were a bit of an imposter, so they were facing an imposter syndrome. And it was during those conversations that I felt that it was sometimes their own barriers that was keeping them from really having a voice in those types of investment funds. In many cases as well, these women investors felt that the types of industries that they wanted to invest in were not supported by their male colleagues, because there's also a slightly different preference, whether you're a male investor or a female investor. So male investors will typically be more attracted to more tech industries, but I truly believe that we need to have a more balanced representation of startups that we invest in. Some of the women entrepreneurs that I spoke with, they told me that their approach was to behave like men, and I also don't think this is the right approach. I think we need both. Obviously, we are both members of society, but I think we are compatible sometimes. It's nice to see a startup that has, the kind of competitive side, let's say the generally male, let's say, characteristics, and then what also women can bring to the table, the empathy, for instance. Of course, those are generalizations. I mean, you can be very competitive as a woman, but I think we need to have both, and I don't think we need to encourage women to act like men. I think there's a bit of sometimes misunderstanding around what the word equality means. It's not that we become the same. We don't need to act like men, and many women entrepreneurs feel that this is maybe the only way. But then again, as you mentioned, if they do act like men, the perception is that, it's kind of a negative perception, even if they act the same way as men do.
In the next few years, what key changes do you hope to see in gender equality within the entrepreneurship and venture capital funding world?
So one of the important change that needs really to be pushed forward is encouraging role models, encouraging these role models to be put forward, because I think there are a lot of brilliant female entrepreneurs. We need to encourage these women to become role models. We need to also, encourage journalists to talk more about women entrepreneurs. I think quotas sometimes are tricky because We often see panels, for example, where you have one woman, and then even women sometimes feel that they are there just because they're a woman, not because they deserve it. They're not only represented because we need a number, we need to say, oh, hey, we have women investors on board. It's more that we really need you, we need your perspective. We know that, for instance, in investment, intuition is very important. We also move away a little bit from this division of male, female, etc. Especially, for example, in some of the groups, we see a lot of networks that are just dedicated for women, and I think this is the wrong approach. I think we all need each other, and it doesn't make a lot of sense because a lot of these networks are already dominated by men, just because that's how it is. Over the past decades, it's been mostly men who have started successful businesses. So I think if you are a woman, you need to network with men and with women. You need to just kind of build your relationship. There's been a lot of experiments also, as I mentioned, that show that if you're a woman, so they kind of give the script, for example, a script in the voice of a man and in the voice of a woman, and it's exactly the same idea, but the investors will invest in the man and not in the woman, etc. And she told me something that I thought was very interesting, that this is all counterproductive in a way. I mean, it's good to create this awareness, but to her, this has become almost discouraging, because she reads all of these studies and then she almost kind of gets discouraged. So I think there is a lot of value in those studies, but at the same time, we need to really empower women to kind of go beyond their gender, and not kind of always be conscious of their gender as maybe something that's going to stop them. So I think that's one of the changes that I would like to see, that if you are someone who has potential, regardless of your gender, regardless of your race, I mean, it's a different topic, but I think we really need to start looking at individuals as they are and the potential that they have, and appreciating also maybe other kind of skills and other characteristics of humans beyond just competitiveness, beyond how do we measure success in general, because I think we need all of the kind of richness of qualities that entrepreneurs can bring to the table.
If you could send a message to aspiring women entrepreneurs today, what would it be?
There's this famous quote from Henry Ford, whether you think you can make it or you can't, you are right. So I think the first thing you need to work on and to focus on throughout your journey as a woman entrepreneur is just your mindset. If you're passionate about your startup, just focus on your mindset, on feeling that you are powerful, that you can make it, and everything will fall into place eventually.